For this version of the bear coming from the Saturday market, picking up his honey, or maybe he's going to the Saturday market to sell his honey. I think I like that better because he's got the hive and everything. So I decided to color some of it in, and I just used a few different colors. I used the goldenrod for the bees and the hive, and then this French gray I used for the tops of these canning jars, the tires, any place that's kind of a gray. And I went a little bit darker on the tires than on these because I wanted them to be a little bit lighter, but you can't really tell a difference too much. And then the red for the bike. My first bike that I bought with like my own berry picking money when I was 12 was baby blue, a baby blue Schwinn. That was before they made girls' bikes, so it was a boy's bike. And then I'm gonna use this moss green for his collar and pants, and then the light umber for him. Now, the only thing I did here, other than just go over with a nice even coat of color on everything, I went over this part a little bit more to make it a little darker, the back of his head, and this ear that's in the back. It's hard to tell in this picture, but if you look at your pattern, you can see it. And then I kind of went under the mouth and a little around the eyes, just to give it a little bit more depth. And then what you always want to do is finish it with some jacquard textile medium. This is 100 colorless extender. I find this on Amazon, and a little jar lasts a long, long time. And you only want to put it where the color is. You don't want to just like go back and forth over all of the fabric. And if you're using, like here, I started by going over the yellow and then moved to the green and then moved to the red. Because if I had started with the red and I didn't wash my brush, some of that red might show up in the yellow. So to just keep the colors as close to possible, I started with the lightest and worked to darkest. Or, even better still, rinse your brush out. So I'm just gonna go over those again. What this does is it will keep the colors from rubbing off on your hands when you're stitching, which they will do. And then when you're done stitching, you just press it, and then that sets the colors, and they can be washed and they are permanent, which is really cool if you wanna make a children's quilt or whatever. The other thing I wanted to point out is this is freezer paper on the back. So I printed my pattern in reverse. This is my rough pattern. You will have a better pattern than this. And the patterns come with the original orientation and the reverse in case you want to do this. So this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of freezer paper, which you can buy. Sometimes I have it on my website. And then I ironed the wax side to the back of my fabric. And that's how I traced it using a light box. And then before I even took that off, I went ahead and colored, because it's kind of hard to color on, let's see if I can show you, on fabric that, let's see, let me see if I can, here's a piece. I don't want to show too much of this one, but, so it's kind of hard to color on just raw fabric without anything below it because it wiggles around. Whereas if you're coloring on fabric that's attached to, well, there it's not really attached. Let's see, is it attached? Yeah, it's attached there. If you're coloring on fabric that has the freezer paper on the back, it's stabilized. So it's almost like, you know, coloring on rough paper, which is really, really helpful. So I'm just gonna let that dry for a little bit, and then I'm gonna start stitching them up. Okay, here's Bare Necessities all stitched up. And I know in the little clip a minute ago, I showed that I colored this in with red. Well, I didn't quite like it in red. So I went over it with some blue and then a little more blue because it was really purple then. But I think I got a nice blue in there. So if you want to just start with a blue that matches the thread that you're going to use, that's a okay thing too. So you might want to experiment with what color you want his bike to be. There are several different stitches on here. I used the fan stitch for the leaves. I'll go over that. And the words are just straight stitches. The bees are done using fly stitches, and I'll show you that because I think kind of clever. And then the basket is woven. So these are just individual long stitches that go all the way across and all the way down. And then the dots are French knots. In his shirt, they're just one wrap around the needle because I wanted them to be smaller. And then the little door on the beehive is 3 wraps around. And then his eye, if you can see, is just 2 stitches. It's 1 stitch this way and then 1 stitch at a little bit of an angle there. And his nose is like 3 satin stitches right next to each other. And the bee wing, the bee stripes are also satin stitched. So I colored their bodies in with yellow, if you remember. So all I had to do was use a darker thread to do the bodies. So on the next version, I decided to use 1 color, and it's a really pretty variegated thread. So it shows off different colors and different leaves, which I like. So I'm going to show you, I don't normally use a hoop. I'm going to because you really do need to use a hoop when you're doing that basket. So, but I'll start with the leaves. So I call it a fan stitch. So you start at the top of the leaf and go down at the base. And then come up on the other side of that initial stitch right on the line. And you're going to bring your needle down in that same hole at the base. And then up on the other side on the line. Oops, sorry. Earthquake. And in the same hole at the bottom. So you just continue down each side, and at the base you put it in the same hole every time. And it's just a fast way to fill in an area, and it gives it a little bit of a texture too. It's a little thicker than just maybe a satin stitch. And that is how easy the fan stitch is. Just like that. Now another fun stitch, I think, a fun way of making bees, is basically it's all just using a fly stitch. So we're going to start halfway down the body on one side of the bee, and then just go right across the body, up at the head. Now instead of putting my needle down right on the other side of that loop like I would with a fly stitch, I'm going to put it at the end of one of the antennae and then up at the end of the other one. And then just put the needle down on the inside of that thread. Now I've got the top of the body. And then you just repeat that with the bottom and the stinger. So a little fly stitch, and there's a stinger. So now we've got the body. And to do the stripes, I just do just maybe 2 or 3 stitches at the head and the bottom for a stripe. 2 is really all you need. And then move up to that middle stripe. And we just do some satin stitches. So these are just straight across and touching each other. Maybe 4 stitches would make a nice fat stripe. And then we move on to the head. And then guess what we do for the wings? We're going to do a fly stitch. This time we are going to put the needle down right on the other side of that loop to hold it in place. So that is how you do these little bees. It's actually pretty simple and fast. And the fly stitch is a great stitch to use for making these little guys. I took the hoop off because I remembered I wanted to do a stem stitch around the basket first, and I like to work without a hoop. So for a stem stitch, I use about a 1/16 of an inch and then come up in the same hole as the previous stitch. And I'll show you how I like to turn corners. There's other ways of doing it, but I take my last stitch and I go down right in the corner. I turn my fabric over and then I thread my needle through one of the previous stitches. Now I bring my needle up right in that same corner and it's locked in place, so it's not going to come out, and I can just start stitching this other direction. So that's how I like to turn corners, and that is how I do the stem stitch. And oh, one other thing I wanted to point out, this branch is inside of the basket. So since it's inside, it has to be stitched first. So stitch the branch first and then stitch the basket over it. Now that I have the outline of my basket, I can do the woven part. So I'm using a hoop, and this is just an ancient hoop I've had for a long time. It's nice because it's so smooth, but it says hold tight, made in USA. So I don't know if you can still get these or not, but I like that it's a spring instead of the type that you have to screw the little screw, because those kind of have a chunky area that I tend to get my thread wrapped around. Okay, so we're just going to take one stitch all the way across and then come up and do another stitch. And one more. And then we change directions. And we start at the top and go down to the bottom, and this time we are going to weave it. So I'll go over, under, and then over. And then you just do the opposite on the next one. So since I went over this stitch, this line, I'm going to go under it, over and under. So now it looks like that branch is inside of the basket, and that's what we wanted. And these are kind of loose since they're such big stitches. If you feel more comfortable tacking them at the intersection, you could put just a little tiny stitch where they intersect. I'm not going to. I'm not going to use this in something where those could get snagged or anything, so I think I'll be okay. And that's the cute little basket. Isn't that cute? Okay, and then we also have these stitches, running stitches on his pants. The running stitch is the easiest stitch, I think. It's just an up, down, up, down, up, down. And you don't have to trace each individual stitch. You can just trace a line and then do your own running stitch over them if you'd like. And that is how fast those little running stitches go. So the last thing on this one are these words, fresh honey. This is my story. He's on his way to Saturday market, where he goes every Saturday to sell his fresh honey. And he brings his bees along with him because they're his friends. So that's the story. So these are just done with straight stitches. So up, down, and then that makes really easy lettering. And instead of doing curved lines, that's kind of a short F, the end on that F. Let me make it a little bit longer. There. Okay, so instead of doing a curved line like for the R and the S, I'm just going to take straight stitches. So they're going to be more angular. So that's going to form the curved part of the R, just like that. And then here's the tail. So even though words are tiny, they're really easy to do. And then he's got his little jars of honey all ready to go. Okay, I'll finish stitching this up, and this little guy will be off to his Saturday market with his honey which I love honey. I'm kind of a honey nut. So I hope you enjoy stitching this guy up. He needs a name. I'm not sure what his name should be, but I'll come up with something. I can't wait to see how you stitch him up. See you next time. Bye.